Warringah.
I ask leave of the House to move amendments 1 to 10 on sheet 2 as circulated in my name together.
Is leave granted? Call the Assistant Minister.
Leave is granted.
The leave is granted. The member for Warringah may proceed.
I move amendments 1 to 10 on sheet 2 as circulated in my name together. Mr Speaker, I'm actually disappointed I need to move this amendment. But the reality is, when we look at the process of consideration in detail in relation to this bill, where many on the crossbench have attempted to improve the effect and the powers of this alleged net zero economy authority under this bill, it's clear that the government is still very limited and very blinkered in terms of what it is, which industry and which very specific workers it's willing to help. And that is why I do rise to move my amendment to amend the name of this bill to what it in fact is, which is the Coal and Gas-Fired Worker Transition Authority Bill. It's necessary for the government to be very clear and to not mislead people and communities as to the very limited extent of support that this bill offers. Coal mining communities such as those in the Hunter and other areas around Australia that work in mines that are for export might be mistaken in thinking that a just transition would be afforded to them under this bill. That is not the case. It needs to be made clear. This House has not voted to accept amendments by many here that would provide a mechanism, amendments to even do it, or at the very least a mechanism to ensure it is possible or within the powers of the authority to do this, or even within the terms of review, that it would be part of it to broaden over time the scope and the powers of the authority, for it to be then in keeping with the alleged name of being a net zero economy authority. What we've seen instead is industries, especially those that we know will phase out as a result of transition to a low-carbon economy. We know that our economy is changing, and it needs to change fast. In fact, we need to put an end to coal and gas. We need to have no new coal and gas. We need to end those export industries and transition to others. And the first step in that is recognising it. 2023 was the first year where temperatures on land exceeded 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. As Joel Gurgis' quarterly essay named Highway to Hell outlines and delivered today, outlines climate change and Australia's future, it is a grim scientific account of what we are facing. Transition will and must occur, and we need to support our economy and communities and its workers in doing so. The International Energy Agency forecasts that the world is decarbonising. Our trading partners are decarbonising. Their demand for our fossil fuels is going to change. It is going to decline. We need to address and assist those communities as well. It would be remiss to only pick those. It's like a narrow picking of a few winners, a few communities that deserve the power of the authority and not the others. And so that is why, reluctantly, what we need to show is that with this bill, we need to ensure it really is only directed to those that it is actually empowered to assist. It will not impact many, many others in fossil fuel industries and impacted by the transition to net zero. We're seeing across a lot of industries a lot of greenwashing. The use of that term, net zero, it's a nice phrase. It rings. It makes people reading this think that it is addressing a very specific thing. There's a very real reason why I know the drafters for the government use that term in this authority, and that is why I'm moving this amendment to change it, because I think we need to be really clear. A net zero economy goes much broader than just coal and gas industry workers in the energy industry that's relating to coal and gas, to fossil fuels. And so if we're genuinely going to say it's a net zero economy, then it must go much broader. And that is why I do move this amendment to ensure we genuinely do not leave anyone behind, and that if this, I want to make sure that no one is misled by this bill, that in fact they are all very clear, that communities know. They know the importance of the terminology of net zero. There is a growing awareness, and they know that the use of that term is also associated with much greenwashing, and we need to make sure that consistency and climate commitment is attached to that. And so in the absence of broadening the scope of this authority to generally provide work plans to address the other industries that will be impacted by a net zero transition, it is necessary to call a spade, and that the operating provisions of this Act should be reflected in its name, and that's why I've moved this amendment.
The question is the amendments moved by the member for Warringah be agreed to. Give the call to the Assistant Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. The government does not accept the proposed amendment. Indeed, to accept it would be to mislead about the intent of this bill or the provisions within it. We've just spent almost 2 hours considering this bill in detail. I've stood here and outlined the broad powers that sit within the Net Zero Economy Authority. If we were to accept this change, which in my view talks down to workers in a range of essential industries for our economy, if we were to accept this change, it would not reflect the bill that is in front of us. It would not reflect the ambitions that the government has for this authority. It would not reflect the expectations of this parliament, who I hope will soon vote for this bill. It would not reflect our ambitions for what that authority needs to go on and do. I outlined the work, the powers that are there in section 16. I outlined the hundreds of millions of dollars the government has put in the budget for this authority to do all of that work. And so to simply try and divide Australians by saying this is just for a small section of workers is wrong. It is completely wrong. The amendment would not reflect the bill as it is on the table right there. And I would urge the member for Warringah, who I know comes and does, as I seek to, raise the standard of political debate. I don't think that this is an appropriate way to raise the standard of political debate. It narrows the title of the bill, narrows the title of the authority in a way that actually doesn't reflect the work that it will do. I agree with the member for Warringah when she says it's time to stand up for integrity and accountability and restore trust in Australian politics. This change would not do that. I know that the member for Warringah has done a lot of work when it comes to increasing accountability for those of us elected to parliament, when it comes to integrity in political advertising. In my view, this would actually be a lie in terms of what this authority does if we were to change it to this name. It's so much bigger in scope. The transformation is so much bigger than the simple title change that's proposed. The government doesn't support it. I don't think anyone in this parliament should.
The question is the amendments be agreed to, and give the call to the member for Warringah.
A question for the Assistant Minister. If it is the intent of the government to generally have an authority that addresses an entire net zero economy transition, which means going broadly across a lot of areas, could the Minister clarify why Part 5, Energy Industry Jobs Plan, is limited in Section A to only employee, in Section 54, why it is limited to only those relating to the closure of the whole or part of a coal-fired power station or gas-fired power station, that is the only requirement to trigger the creation of an energy industry job plan.
The question is the amendments be agreed to, and give the call to the Assistant Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. Part 5 is just one part of the bill. We've also already outlined that section of the Energy Industry Jobs Plan will be reviewed in the first 365 days, should this parliament choose to pass the bill. For other matters in terms of why there is a focus on those immediate closures, I'd refer the member to the impact analysis that's contained in the explanatory memorandum.
The question